Hello everyone, my name is Don K. Preston. I am the president of Preterist Research Institute. We're examining Matthew 16:27 and 28, where our Lord said, "The Son of Man will come in the glory of the Father with his angels, and shall reward every man according to his works. And verily I say unto you, there are some standing here which shall not taste of death until they see the Son of Man coming in his kingdom with power and great glory." What I've been sharing with you up to this point is the fact that Jesus was drawing on several Old Testament prophecies of the coming of the Lord in judgment to establish the kingdom. Now, why is that important? Well, it is important because Jesus said in Matthew 5:17 and 18, "Do not think that I came to destroy the law and the prophets. I did not come to destroy, but to fulfill. For verily I say unto you, until heaven and earth passes away, not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the law until it is all fulfilled." Now, very briefly, let me make the following argument. Jesus said that the Old Testament, that's the entire scope of the Old Testament, not one jot, not one tittle. Jesus said none of the Old Testament would pass away until all of it was fulfilled. But Jesus' prediction of his coming in judgment to establish the kingdom is taken from the Old Covenant prophecies, specifically, as we have seen, Isaiah 40, Isaiah 62, and Daniel chapter 7. Now, we could expand that exponentially almost, because the coming of the Lord of Matthew 16, as we shall see as we continue in this series, is also the coming of the Lord to bring in the new heavens and the new earth. It is the coming of the Lord to consummate the 70 weeks. Again, we'll have more to say about that as we continue. But again, here's the argument. Not one jot, not one tittle of the entire scope of the Old Covenant could pass away until all of it was fulfilled. But the Old Covenant foretold and predicted and prophesied the coming of the Lord in judgment to establish the kingdom. Therefore, until the Lord came in judgment to establish the kingdom, the old law of Moses, all of it, not just part of it, but the entire scope of the law of Moses did not pass away. Do you see how important that is? Why is that important again? Well, here's why. Our dispensational friends say that the Old Covenant prophecies of the coming of the Lord and the establishment of the kingdom have not been fulfilled. The amillennialists, although they are horribly confused on the topic of eschatology, sometimes admit in unguarded moments that the Old Testament did predict the resurrection, coming of the Lord in judgment. The postmillennialists admit and agree that the Old Testament foretold the coming of the Lord in judgment to establish the kingdom. So, what does that mean? That means that all three of the futurist eschatologies all agree and admit that the Old Testament foretold the coming of the Lord in judgment to establish the kingdom. But here's what's really weird. All three of the futurist eschatologies say the law of Moses has been done away with. Wait a minute. If the law of Moses has been taken out of the way, then that means the coming of the Lord, judgment, and resurrection must have either failed to occur or they must have occurred. What did Jesus say again? Not one jot, not one tittle shall pass from the law until it is all, not some of it, not a little bit of it, not even most of it, but until it is all fulfilled. Folks, listen to me really carefully, okay? The Old Testament foretold the coming of the Lord, the judgment and resurrection. Jesus said until all of the Old Testament was fulfilled, the Old Testament could not pass away. You cannot, as a futurist, as a believer in a yet future coming of the Lord, judgment and resurrection, you cannot say those are in the future without at the same time affirming that the law of Moses is still in effect. Do you see the problem? Do you see the power of the problem? As we continue in this study, we'll develop this problem more and more. We'll have more on the flip side, so we'll see you then. Thanks for joining us for Preston's Ponderings.